She drove 40 miles into the northern woods that November morning believing she had come to a cabin to die. Instead, it became the place where she was finally found by herself. At 75 years old, discarded by the man she had given 47 years to, pushed out of the home she had built with her own two hands, Margareta was left with nothing but a forgotten cabin in the northern pines. A cabin her ex-husband Hardy had laughed about for decades. A cabin everyone said was too small, too far, too broken to matter. What Hardy didn't know, what Margareta herself was about to discover, was that when you take everything from a woman who has already survived more than you'll ever understand, you don't break her. You hand her back to herself. 1 year later, when the world finally came looking for that forgotten cabin in the northern pines, they didn't find a frail old woman waiting to die. They found a secret her mother had hidden there for 50 years. A secret so powerful it would force everyone who ever dismissed her to see exactly who they had underestimated. This is Margareta's story. That being forgotten is not the same as being worthless, and that sometimes the women who came before us leave us the exact map we need. We just have to be brave enough to finally open it. Before we begin, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The road to Mirapon was not really a road anymore. It was a memory of one. Margareta gripped the steering wheel of the old Buick with both hands. Her knuckles were white. Her left hip was already screaming. Weeds had grown waist-high down the center of the dirt path. Fallen branches lay across it like broken ribs. The car scraped against the undergrowth. Twice, 3 times. She winced each time. She was 75 years old. She had $580 in a checking account. She had 2 suitcases in the back seat, and she had nowhere else on earth to go. The engine coughed. She held her breath. Don't quit on me. Not now, not here. It didn't quit, it kept going, which somehow felt worse, because if the car had died, she would have had an excuse to sit there and cry, to call someone, to be rescued. But no one was coming to rescue her. Not Hardy, not Soren, not Vivienne, not anyone. She had spent 47 years being exactly what Hardy wanted: a gracious hostess, a soft voice, a beautiful home, dinner on the table at 6, silent applause at his Christmas parties. And in exchange, 2 months ago, he had sat her down at the kitchen island, the one she had picked out in 1998, and he had told her, with his lawyer voice, the one he used on hostile witnesses, that he had fallen in love with Celeste, 36 years old, paralegal, smelled like vanilla, and that Margareta would need to be out of the house by the end of October. Her house, the house she had chosen the pink colors for, the house where she had planted every single tree in the yard. When she had called Soren, her son had sighed. That long, tired sigh men learn from their fathers. Mom, try not to make this harder than it needs to be. Dad says he's being generous. Generous. When she had called Vivienne, her daughter had said, I'm not picking a side, Mother. You'll land on your feet. You always do. They were wrong about that. She had never landed on her feet. Not once. She had simply stood where she was placed. The cabin appeared through the pines suddenly, the way cabins do in the northern woods. There was no clearing announcing it, no sign, no welcome. One moment only trees. The next birch light, Margareta killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was enormous. It pressed against the windows of the car, it pressed against her chest, it pressed against the back of her teeth. She sat with both hands on the wheel. She looked at what her mother Astrid had left her 33 years ago. On the day Astrid Lindquist had died of a stroke in a hospital bed in Duluth, with Margareta holding her hand. The cabin was smaller than she remembered, much smaller. It was a single-story log structure, maybe 400 square feet, with a sagging porch and a rusted metal roof stained with decades of fallen pine needles. One of the front windows was cracked. The chimney stones had come loose on one side. Moss had crept up the north wall until the wall and the forest floor were almost the same thing. Behind the cabin, through a gap in the pines, she could see Mirror Pond, gray and still and wide under the cold November sky, with the first thin skin of ice already forming along the shallows. This was where 47 years of marriage had brought her. Her mother had tried to tell her once, back when Margareta was in her 40s and already exhausted, Birchlight will be there, men flicka, if you ever need somewhere to go. Margareta had laughed gently, kissed her mother's forehead, and said she didn't need anywhere to go. She had a beautiful home. She hadn't understood then. She understood now. She opened the car door. The cold hit her like a slap, a dry, mineral cold that smelled of pine resin and lake water and something older than both. She limped toward the cabin, her hip already protesting. She climbed the 3 sagging porch steps, the brass key her mother had given her 3 decades ago, a key she had kept hidden at the back of her jewelry drawer in a small velvet pouch, a secret even from Hardy. Fit the lock perfectly. The door swung open with a low groan. Inside was worse than she had prepared for. The air was thick with dust, old wood smoke, and the unmistakable sour scent of mice. A single room, a cast-iron stove in the corner, rusted at the seams. A narrow bed frame with a mattress so old it was collapsing on itself. A small table, 2 wooden chairs, one of them broken. A cupboard with its door hanging off one hinge. A sink with a hand pump that clearly hadn't moved in years. No electricity, no running water, no heat, nothing. Margareta stood in the doorway, and something inside her gave way. She sat down slowly on the chair that still mostly worked, and she began to cry. Not gently, not the quiet, dignified tears of a woman who is managing. She cried the way a woman cries when she has finally, truly, run out of road. She cried until her chest ached and her throat burned. The sound filled the small cabin and leaked out into the silent pines. Outside, on the lake, a single loon called once across the water. A long, low, mournful note. It sounded exactly like what she felt inside. Then it was quiet again, and Margareta sat alone in her mother's cabin as the November light began to fail, wondering if this was where she had come to die. She slept in her coat that first night, buttoned to the throat. She had dragged the rotting mattress to the floor and covered it with a moving blanket from the car. She had not lit the stove. She wasn't sure she remembered how, and she was too tired to learn. She woke at some point in the deep blue dark, her breath fogging above her face, her hip locked, her left hand so stiff she couldn't make a fist. She did not know what time it was. She did not know what day it was. She did not entirely know who she was. That was the first surprise. She was alive. Somehow, she lay there in the cold and the dark, and she listened to the wind moving through the pines, and she thought about Hardy sleeping in their bed, in their house, in their sheets, with Celeste curled against him, Celeste who smelled like vanilla, Celeste who was younger than Soren. Margareta turned her face to the wall. A small thought arrived, quiet, almost shy. If I freeze tonight, nobody will know for weeks. The thought did not frighten her. That was what frightened her. She sat up, slowly, every joint complaining. She fumbled through her suitcase in the dark, her fingers closed around something stiff. A long white envelope. She didn't remember packing it. She lit one of the candles she had brought. The flame jumped, trembled, steadied. The envelope had her name across the front, in Hardy's hand, that careful slanted script he used for cards, the one she had once thought was elegant. She slid her finger under the flap. Inside, divorce papers. She had expected those, and tucked behind them, a check, $5,000, made out to her, signed in his big, confident lawyer's signature, and a note, 3 lines. Greta, please be reasonable about this. I'd like us both to move on with dignity, disappear gracefully. Disappear gracefully. She read it again, to make sure. The candle flame shook with her breathing. Disappear gracefully. After 47 years, after 2 children, after every dinner, every flu, every Christmas, every funeral, every long night of his ambitions, she had silently underwritten with hers. Disappear. Gracefully, something in Margaretta's chest, something very old, something she had not heard from in a long time. Spoke. It said, no. She did not say it out loud. She did not have to. She walked to the cast iron stove in the corner, her hip dragging, the check in one hand, the note in the other, the candle in her teeth. She knelt down, pulled open the iron door. The hinge shrieked. Inside, old gray ash and a curl of birch bark someone had left there. Maybe her mother. Maybe a stranger. Maybe nobody at all. She held the candle to the bark. It caught with a soft hiss. She fed the check in first. The corner curled, then the middle, then her name, then his signature. The flame ate it without ceremony. She fed the note in next. Disappear gracefully turned brown, then black, then gone. She stayed kneeling on the cold cabin floor until the fire was just embers. $5,000. In a checking account with $580 in it. She should have kept it. She knew that. A reasonable woman would have kept it. But Margareta, for the first time in her adult life, was not interested in being reasonable. She was interested in being alive. She closed the stove door, blew out the candle, crawled back to the mattress, and slept until dawn. The first week she survived. That was all. She did not plan. She did not dream. She moved from one small task to the next and prayed her body would hold. She dragged the ruined mattress out onto the porch. She swept the cabin floor with a birch broom she found behind the stove, the handle worn smooth by some other woman's hands, maybe her mother's, maybe her grandmother's. She scrubbed mouse droppings off the cupboard shelves with rags torn from an old flannel shirt she found folded on a high shelf, a shirt that still faintly smelled of her mother's lavender soap. Margareta pressed it to her face, stood in the middle of the cabin, cried again. But quieter this time, she pumped the kitchen sink until her arm shook. On the 4th day, the handle finally loosened, and cold, clean water came gasping up from the well beneath the cabin. She almost fell to her knees. She filled a pot, boiled it on the rusted stove, which she had coaxed back to life with dried birch bark and matches and a stubbornness she did not know she still owned. She ate carefully. She had brought crackers, canned soup, oatmeal, a jar of peanut butter. She had figured out on day 2 that she would need to make it last at least a month before she risked the 30-minute drive into Pine Brook Falls. On the 5th day, she drove to a small bait shop near the turnoff to her dirt road. The bait shop owner was a leathery man named Cal who chewed unlit cigars and never quite met her eyes. She left her cabin address with him. She left her name, she told him. If you don't see my Buick come this way once a week, would you mind driving up? He grunted. He nodded. That was the entire safety net she had built. A man named Cal who chewed cigars and kept a sharp eye on the road. It was enough. It would have to be. She spoke to no one else. No one called. Her phone had 1 bar of signal if she stood at the very end of the dock, but she kept it off to save battery. Soren did not call. Vivienne did not call. Hardy certainly did not call. She existed in silence, alone, with pine and water and sky. And slowly, something she had not expected began to happen. She began to notice things. She noticed that the loons on Mirror Pond called to each other every morning at dawn. Their voices filled the cabin even through closed windows. She noticed that the chickadees who came to the porch railing were not afraid of her. She noticed that when she sat very still on the dock in the late afternoon, the lake turned colors she had no name for. Pewter, then rose, then a soft violet, then black. She noticed she had not thought about Celeste in 2 days. She noticed that the noticing itself was a kind of medicine. On the 10th day, she was sweeping under the narrow bed frame. The broom struck something solid beneath the floorboards. She paused. She got down on her aching knees, slowly. A 5-minute operation involving the bed frame and a great deal of breath held against the pain. And she ran her hand along the wooden planks. One of them was loose. Margareta pressed on it. It shifted beneath her palm. She worked her fingertips into the seam, slowly, carefully, and she lifted the plank away. Beneath it, a small, flat wooden box, wrapped in oilcloth. Her mother's handwriting on the top in faded pencil said only, "For Greta." "When you are ready." Margareta sat back on her heels on the cold floor. She did not open the box. Not yet. She just looked at her mother's handwriting, that careful, slanted Scandinavian script she had not seen in 33 years. And she felt something she had not felt since the day Hardy told her about Celeste. Not grief, not fear. She felt seen. For Greta. When you were ready. Her mother had written those words at some point before she died. Her mother had placed this box beneath this floorboard, knowing that one day Margareta would come, knowing that one day Margareta would need to come. Mama, you knew before I did. She did not feel ready, not yet. Whatever was inside that box had waited 33 years. It could wait a little longer. She wrapped the oilcloth back over the top, lowered the plank carefully into place, and sat there on the cold floor with her hand pressed flat to the wood for a long, long time. She did not open the box that day. Or the next. She found she could not bring herself to. Whatever was inside, her mother had wanted her to be ready for. And Margareta, sweeping mouse droppings off cupboard shelves and crying into a flannel shirt, did not feel ready for anything. She left the plank loose. She left the box where it was. She knew where it lived. That was enough for now. On the night of the 12th day, the first real storm came. It arrived the way northern storms do, without apology. The wind began after dark, a low moaning through the pines. It built and built until the whole cabin was shaking on its old log bones. Then came the snow, driven sideways in sheets so thick Margareta could not see the lake from her window. The temperature dropped so fast she could hear the cabin's logs creaking as they contracted. She fed the stove every hour. She wore her coat and her hat, 2 pairs of socks. She wrapped herself in every blanket she owned. And still she shivered. The wind found every gap in the old chinking between the logs. It came through the cracked window. It came up through the floor. At some point in the night, a branch came down on the roof with a crack like a rifle shot. Margareta sat bolt upright on the mattress and waited to see if the ceiling would follow. It didn't, but the wind kept screaming. The storm lasted 2 days. By the second night, she had burned through nearly all the dry wood she had stacked inside. The storm showed no sign of stopping. She was exhausted. She was hungry in a way she had never been hungry in her life. Her hip had locked so badly she could barely stand, and somewhere around midnight, as the wind howled and the cabin shook and she lay curled on the mattress with ice forming on the inside of the window, something inside her snapped. She sat up. She threw off the blankets. She stood up in the middle of that freezing cabin, and she screamed, not words, just sound, a raw, cracked animal sound. That came up from somewhere below her ribs. 47 years of silence. Finally breaking open, she screamed at the storm. She screamed at Hardy. She screamed at Soren and Vivienne. And every dinner party she had smiled through. And every birthday she had remembered for a man who could not be bothered to remember hers. She screamed at the girl she had been at 22, who had said yes when she should have said wait. She screamed until her throat was raw and her legs gave out, and she sank down onto the mattress again, shaking. And then, in the silence that followed, she heard something, a small, rhythmic sound coming from above her, a tapping, Margareta went very still. It was faint, barely audible over the wind, and it was coming from the ceiling, somewhere near the back of the cabin. Above the cupboard, there was a sound like a loose board knocking against a beam in the draft. She had never heard it before, because she had never screamed before. The storm had been masking it, her own grief had been masking it, but now, in the stillness after her own voice, she heard it clearly. She limped across the cabin to the cupboard. She looked up. The ceiling of the cabin was low, just timber beams and rough planks, the underside of what she had assumed was the roof. But now she looked more carefully, and she saw what she had missed for 2 weeks. The planks above the cupboard did not quite match the rest of the ceiling. They were slightly newer, slightly smoother, and in one corner a small iron ring, rusted almost to invisibility, was set flush into the wood. It wasn't a roof. It was a hatch. Margareta's heart began to pound. She dragged one of the wooden chairs over. She climbed up, both hands gripping the cupboard, her hips shrieking. She reached up and hooked her fingers through the iron ring. She pulled nothing. It was stuck, decades of damp and dust and disuse holding it shut. She pulled again, harder. Something in her shoulder gave a warning pop, but she didn't care. She braced her feet on the chair. She hauled down with every ounce of weight her 75-year-old body had left. And the hatch came loose with a cracking sound, swung down on a groaning hinge. A folded wooden ladder dropped out of the ceiling with it. Cold, still air rushed down, air that had been sealed above her for a long, long time. And with it came a smell she had not smelled in 33 years. Linseed oil, cedar shavings, turpentine, the unmistakable, unforgettable smell of her mother's hands. Margareta stood on the chair in the shaking cabin, with the storm still screaming outside, and she looked up into the darkness of the loft her mother had built and hidden and left for her. And she understood, with a clarity that went through her like lightning, that everything she thought she knew about her own mother had been only half the story. She gripped the ladder. She began to climb. The ladder creaked beneath her weight, but it held. Margareta climbed slowly, one painful rung at a time, and when her head rose above the level of the hatch, she stopped. She simply stared. The loft was not large, maybe 8 feet by 12. The ceiling sloped down sharply on both sides, following the pitch of the roof. A single small window at the gable end. A window Margareta had never noticed from outside because it was half hidden by pine branches. Let in the pale stormlight, but what was inside that small space stopped her breath. An easel stood in the center of the loft, an unfinished painting still clamped to it, a painting of Mirror Pond at dawn, the birches catching fire in the first light, the loons just visible on the water. Beside the easel, a workbench ran the length of the wall, and on it, her mother's tools, carving knives of every size, arranged neatly on a strip of leather, chisels, gouges, a small mallet, a wooden plane worn smooth by decades of use. And on shelves that climbed the slanted walls, dozens of carvings, birds, loons of course, but also owls, chickadees, a great blue heron with its neck curved like a question mark, small wooden boxes inlaid with different colored woods, a carved panel of a woman's face that Margareta recognized after a long moment as her own grandmother, whom she had never met, who had stayed behind in Sweden. Paintings leaned against the wall in stacks. Landscapes, lake scenes, a portrait of a young girl with 2 brown braids, whom Margareta realized. With a small, sharp gasp, was herself at 7 years old. She pulled herself fully into the loft, sat down heavily on the wooden floor. Her mother had been an artist. Her mother had been an artist her entire life, and Margareta had never known. She sat there in the cold loft as the storm raged on below, and she tried to make sense of it. Astrid Lindquist, who had spent her life cooking her husband's meals and pressing his shirts and listening to him complain about his back. Astrid, who had never once in Margaretta's memory picked up a paintbrush or a carving knife in their family home in Duluth. Astrid, who had been married for 51 years to a man named Bjorn Lindquist, Margaretta's father, who had laughed at his wife when she spoke, who had cut her off mid-sentence at dinner parties, and who, Margaretta remembered now with a cold, clear shock, had once thrown a small wooden bird across the kitchen and broken it, because he said it was a waste of a grown woman's time. Her mother had not picked up a carving knife again in that house. Not that Margaretta had ever seen, but she had come here somehow, across the decades. Her mother had come here to this cabin, to this loft, and she had kept her art alive and secret. She had carried it up that hidden ladder and closed the hatch behind her and become, for whatever stolen hours she could find, the artist she actually was. Margaretta turned her head slowly, and that was when she saw the envelope. It sat propped on the workbench against a small carved wooden loon, in a spot that would catch the eye of anyone who climbed up into the loft. The paper had yellowed. Her mother's handwriting on the front said simply, "From Mama to my Greta." She took a long time to reach for it. Her hands were shaking when she finally did. She opened it carefully. The wax seal cracked away in tiny dry flakes. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in her mother's careful Swedish accented English. Min älskade flicka, if you are reading this, then you have finally come. I have hoped for this day and feared it in equal measure. For many years, I know what you are living, Greta, I know, because I lived it too. I married your father at 20. By 30, I had forgotten who I was. By 40, I had accepted it. By 50, I had decided it was too late. I was wrong about that. The day I came back to this cabin, the summer your father took you to visit his sister in Chicago, and I told him I was too sick to travel, was the day I started to remember. I was 20 before I married your father. I had a place at the School of Fine Arts in Stockholm. I won a small prize when I was 19, a wooden bird I had carved. They told me I had a future. Your grandfather laughed at that future and shipped me to America to marry a man he had chosen. Your father wanted a beautiful wife. He did not want an artist. The first time I carved something in our kitchen, he threw it against the wall. You were 3 years old. You do not remember. I remember. I did not pick up a knife again. In that house, but this cabin, Greta, this cabin was my grandmother's, and then my mother's, and then mine, and now yours. It is a woman's cabin. It has always been. The men in our family never wanted it because it is small and far and seems worthless to them. That is how it has survived. Come here, Menflicka, open the hatch. Use the tools. You will not believe what your hands remember. You were always the one with the eyes of an artist. Even as a small girl, I watched your father beat that out of you before you were 12. The way mine beat it out of me. I was not strong enough to stop him then. Forgive me, but it is not gone. It is only buried, and you will find it again, exactly where I left mine, for you, here in Birchlight, where the birches catch fire at dawn. You are not too old. You are not finished. You are only now beginning. Mama? Margaretta sat in the cold loft. She read the letter 3 times before she could make the words stop swimming. Then she folded it with slow, careful hands, and she held it against her chest, and she wept. But these were not the tears of 2 weeks ago. These were not the tears of a woman who had run out of road. These were the tears of a woman who had just discovered that the road went much further than she'd thought, and that her mother had walked ahead of her on it all along, leaving markers, lighting the way. Outside, the storm was beginning to soften. The wind dropped. The cabin stopped shaking. A thin gray light began to push through the small loft window. Margareta wiped her face on her sleeve. She stood up, slowly, on legs that ached and trembled. She walked to the workbench. She picked up one of her mother's smaller carving knives. The handle was worn smooth in a particular shape, the shape of her mother's right hand. Margareta's hand was different, wider, more swollen at the knuckles, but when she closed her fingers around the handle, it fit. Somehow, it fit. She did not know how to carve. She had never tried. She was 75 years old. Her hip was locked. Her knuckles were swollen. Her left hand still shook from the cold. She had no idea what she was doing. She picked up a small piece of birchwood from a bin under the workbench, pale, smooth, curved slightly, the size of her palm. She held the knife above it, and she stopped, because she did not know where to begin. Outside, very far away, a loon called once across the water. A single low note, the first sound of the morning after the storm. Margareta closed her eyes. She thought of her mother's hands, the careful slanted handwriting, the way Astrid had pressed her thumb to Margareta's forehead when she was a child with a fever, and said, Min Flicka, my little girl. She thought of the wooden bird her father had thrown. She thought of the wooden bird she had not yet made. And she set the blade against the wood. She made one small cut, then another. The wood gave way, softly, like it had been waiting. Pale curls fell to the workbench. Like the first snow, she did not know what she was carving. She did not need to know. Through the small loft window, the first thin light of dawn began to climb the trunks of the birch trees outside, and the bark caught the light and turned pale gold. Aspen glow. Her mother had named this place for the brief moments, when something ordinary caught fire. Margareta sat in a loft above the cabin her ex-husband had laughed at, with her mother's knife in her 75-year-old hand, and birchwood shavings falling around her feet like snow. And she did not know it yet, but she would not stop. Not that morning, not that winter, not for the rest of her life. December came down on Birchlight like a hammer. The cold was not the cold Margareta had known her whole life in Madison. This was something else, a deep, patient, northern cold. That crept in through the log walls no matter how much wood she fed the stove. That froze the water in her kettle if she left it too far from the heat. That made her fingers ache so badly at night she could not sleep. She had built a small routine. After the storm, wake before dawn, light the stove, break the ice on the water bucket, eat half a cup of oatmeal, because she was rationing, climb the ladder, always slowly, her hips screaming with every rung, sit at her mother's workbench with a small piece of birchwood and one of the carving knives, and try, that was the word, true. She had not made anything yet, not really. She had spent the first week just holding the tools, turning them over in her swollen hands, feeling the smooth wood of the handles, where her mother had held them. She had studied the unfinished painting on the easel, Mirror Pond at dawn, the birches catching fire, the loons just visible, and she had wondered what her mother had been thinking. The day she set the brush down for the last time, did she know she would not be back? Did she know who would? She had read the letter so many times, the folds were beginning to soften like cloth, and she had tried to carve. It was humiliating. Her first attempt, a small bird, following the shape of one of her mother's loons, came out lopsided. The lines all wrong, the wood splitting where she had cut across the grain instead of with it. Her hands did not know what they were doing. Her mother had said her hands would remember, but her hands did not remember. Her hands had spent 47 years arranging flowers, folding napkins, holding the arm of a man at charity galas. Her hands were strangers to this. She had sat at the workbench on the third day and thrown the ruined bird across the loft and wept. but she had climbed back up the next morning. And the morning after that, because what else was there? By mid December, her food was running low. She made the drive into Pine Brook Falls, a terrifying 30 minutes on unplowed roads, in a car that had no business on them. She spent $94 on rice and beans and canned vegetables, a bag of apples, 4 candles, because her kerosene was almost gone. She did not speak to the cashier beyond what was required. She did not meet anyone's eyes. She felt, walking through that small grocery store, as though she were made of glass, and anyone who looked at her too closely would see straight through to what she was. Which was, she did not have a word for what she was. Not yet. She drove home. She unloaded the groceries. She climbed the ladder, and she worked until the light failed. Then, on the morning of December the 22nd, she fell. She was coming down the ladder with one of her mother's smaller carving knives in her hand, a stupid violation of a rule she had set for herself on day one. Never carry the blade down the ladder. Set it on the workbench, climb empty-handed, always. But she had been distracted. She had been thinking about a curve in the wood she had not been able to find with her tools, a curve she could see in her mind, but could not yet make her hand obey. She was thinking about the curve, so her foot slipped. Her hip gave out halfway down. The wrong hip, the bad one, the one that had been quiet for almost a week, and had chosen this morning to remind her who was in charge. She came down hard. Her right shoulder hit first. The pain was a white sheet across her vision. The knife in her left hand caught her, across the inside of her left forearm, on the way down. The cut was deep. Margaretta lay on the floor of the cabin, in the gray December light, and watched her own blood spread across the wooden planks, and felt for a moment completely calm, like a stranger watching herself from above. Oh, she thought, this is how it happens. Then the pain arrived, and she began to shake. She managed to crawl to the sink. She pumped water with her good hand. She wrapped the wound with strips of the old flannel shirt that still somehow smelled of her mother, lavender soap, faint, almost gone. She tied it as tight as she could with her teeth and one trembling hand. The bleeding slowed, but did not stop. She knew she should drive to the urgent care in Pine Brook Falls. She knew that. A wound this deep wanted stitches, a real bandage, antibiotics, a doctor who would frown at her and shake his head and ask her if she lived alone. But the roads were drifted in, her hip would not hold the pedals, and she could not steer a Buick with one arm. She would go in the morning, when the sun was up, when she could feel her legs again. If she got that far, she lay down on the mattress, pulled the blankets over herself, stared at the ceiling. Her shoulder throbbed, her arm throbbed, her hip throbbed. Everything she had was throbbing, and something inside her, the thing that had been holding her up since the letter, since the loft, since the hatch, simply let go. I can't do this, she thought. I can't. I'm too old. I was always too old. Mama was wrong. She turned her face to the wall, and she waited. She lay there for hours. The light shifted across the cabin floor. The stove went out. The cold began to seep back in. Her arm pulsed under the makeshift bandage. She did not check it. She did not want to know. She heard the wind move through the pines outside. She heard a loon call once, very far away, and then nothing. She thought about Hardy. She wondered if he would feel anything when they finally found her in the spring, when the snow melted, and Cal from the bait shop drove out and found a woman's body, curled on a moldy mattress. She wondered if Soren would cry. She wondered if Vivienne would say. I told her she'd land on her feet. She closed her eyes. She was tired, so tired, and then, for no reason she could name, she turned her head, and she looked up at the open hatch above the cupboard. She had stopped closing it weeks ago. The hatch had been part of the ceiling now, part of her morning, part of her life, and there, hanging from a small peg just inside the loft, where she had hung it, without remembering when, without remembering why, was the first bird she had ever carved. The lopsided one, the one she had thrown, the one she had climbed back up a week later, and quietly picked up from the corner where it had landed and hung from that peg, as if it were already a relic, already part of the story she did not yet know she was telling. It was crooked, the eye was wrong, one wing was too short. It was, without question, the ugliest bird in the world. And it was also the only thing she had ever made with her own hands for herself, for no one else, in 75 years of living. Margareta lay on the mattress in her bloody bandage and looked at that terrible little bird. And something, very small, very quiet, spoke. Your worth, it said, is not in being seen. Your worth is in the making. She did not move for a long time. Then, slowly, she sat up. Her arm screamed. She let it scream. She relit the stove, fed it the last of her dry wood. She made a cup of tea with one hand, spilling some. She drank it slowly, watching the bird, the little lopsided bird, and she made herself a promise, there on the mattress, in the cold cabin, on the shortest day of the year. You are not finished, Margareta Lindquist. You are not finished yet. She drove to urgent care the next morning. As soon as the snow stopped, she put a folded towel over her steering arm, drove one-handed, made it to Pine Brook Falls in 43 minutes. A young woman doctor put 9 stitches in her forearm, asked her 3 times if she lived alone. Margareta lied, said her daughter was visiting. The doctor did not believe her, but she gave her antibiotics anyway, and a tetanus shot, and a stern look, and a card with a hotline number on it, in case Margareta needed to talk to someone. Margareta thanked her, took the card, tucked it into her wallet. She drove home. She put the card on the workbench in the loft. She did not throw it away, but she did not call. She healed slowly. The cut left a long, pale scar that ran from the inside of her elbow halfway down her wrist. She could not use that hand for 2 weeks. She ate one-handed, pumped water one-handed, fed the stove one-handed. She did not climb the ladder until January, when she could finally grip a rung without the wound opening. But when she did climb again, she climbed differently. Something had shifted in her after the fall. She worked now, not because she was trying to prove anything, not to her mother's ghost, not to Hardy, not to herself. She worked because working itself had become the point. Her hands were slow. Her hands were clumsy. Her hands were 75 years old. None of that mattered. What mattered was that each morning she climbed the ladder, sat at her mother's workbench, and made one small mark on one small piece of wood. And slowly, impossibly, her hands began to remember. By the end of January, she had finished her first real carving, a chickadee, small enough to fit in her palm, with a head tilted the way chickadees tilt their heads when they land on a porch railing. It was not perfect, but it was right. She held it up to the light, and she felt something move in her chest that she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. Pride. She set the chickadee on the workbench next to her mother's tools, and she stared at it for a long time. Then she started another. By February, she had finished 3 more birds and repaired the broken chair in the cabin. Using her mother's tools and a piece of birch she had dragged up from the lake. By the end of February, she had begun her first painting on a small wooden panel. Not the lake. Not yet. She was not ready for the lake. But the view of the birches from the cabin window at dawn, the first time she mixed her mother's old oil paint on the palette and touched the brush to the panel, her hand shook so badly she had to set the brush down and wait. Then she picked it up again. and she painted. March came. The days stretched longer. The cold loosened its grip in small, reluctant increments. Margareta found herself standing on the porch one afternoon, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the light move across the lake, and realizing she had gone an entire afternoon without thinking about Hardy, not once, not even as a shadow at the edge of her mind. She was too busy watching the light. That was the day she decided to take 3 of her birds into town. The handcraft market in Pine Brook Falls was a wooden building with a green door. Margareta had driven past it twice that winter, without going in, without quite knowing why. This time she parked. She sat in the Buick for 10 minutes, both hands on the wheel, the paper bag of birds on the passenger seat. Get out, she told herself. She did not move. Get out, Margareta. She did not move, she thought. What am I doing here? I am a 75-year-old woman with a paper bag full of wooden birds and no business in a craft market. They will laugh at me. The woman behind the counter will be polite and she will smile and her eyes will say, "Oh, sweetheart, bless your heart. I should go home. I should go home right now." She put her hand on the door handle. She did not open the door. She closed her eyes, and she thought of the bird on the peg. The first one, the ugly one, the one that had told her, "Your worth is in the making." She opened the car door. She walked across the gravel lot with the paper bag tucked against her chest like a child, her hip dragging, her left arm aching where the scar was still pink. She pushed the green door open. A small bell rang. The market smelled like beeswax and cedar and old coffee. A woman about her own age was sitting behind the counter, reading a paperback. She had silver hair cut short, wire-rimmed glasses, a heavy gray sweater. She looked up when the bell rang. Her eyes were sharp, Kent, but sharp. "Hello," the woman said. Margareta did not move from the doorway. "You okay, hon?" Margareta started. She stopped. "Try again." "I have some birds. I carved them. I don't know if you, She held up the paper bag like a child holding up a drawing. The woman set her paperback down. She stood up, slowly came around the counter. She did not rush. She did not coo. She just walked over to Margareta and held out one hand. "May I see?" Margareta gave her the bag. The woman took it to the counter, set it down, lifted out the first bird, a small chickadee, head tilted just so. She went very still. She set it down, lifted out the second, a wren, tail up, eyes bright. Set it down, lifted out the third, a great horned owl, slightly too big for the others. Margareta had been showing off. She knew she had. The woman looked at the owl for a long moment. Then she looked up at Margareta, over the wire rims of her glasses. "Who carved these?" "I did." "Just you?" "Just me." "From your own design? Or copied?" "Me own." The woman set the owl down very gently, as if it were made of glass. "Honey." "Yes?" "Where have you been hiding?" Margareta opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "In someone else's life," she heard herself say. The woman smiled. It was a slow, astonished smile. "My name is Hazel Brennan. I own this place. And these are the best small carvings that have walked through that door in 20 years. May I sell them?" "Yes." "All 3? "Yes." "I'll price them. I'll be fair. I'll take 20%. The rest is yours. Can you bring me more?" Margareta said, "Yes, I think so. Yes." "How many can you make in a week?" "I don't know. I've only just started." Hazel looked at her over the glasses again. "Started when, exactly?" "November." Hazel set down the pen she had picked up. "This November?" "Yes." The two women stood there, looking at each other, across the counter, across the 3 small wooden birds, across 47 years of being told to be smaller, to be quieter, to be reasonable. Hazel said, very quietly, What did you do before November, sweetheart? Margareta thought about it. She thought about the truth. She thought about how strange the truth would sound, out loud, in a craft market in Pine Brook Falls, to a woman she had just met. And she decided to say it anyway. I was someone else's wife. Hazel nodded, slowly, once. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, Then welcome back, Margarita. Margarita blinked. How do you know my name? Hazel turned the smallest carving over, tipped it so Margareta could see the underside, where Margareta had carefully scratched her initials with the tip of the smallest knife. Mele, followed by a single small mark she had not even thought about. A tiny bird. Hazel smiled. Lucky guess, she said. Hazel sold all 3 birds that afternoon. A man from Duluth, up to look at a cabin he was thinking about buying, bought the owl for his wife's birthday. A woman driving home from Thunder Bay stopped in and bought the wren. The chickadee went to a young couple, honeymooning, who said they wanted to remember the woods. Hazel called the cabin number Margareta had reluctantly written down on a scrap of paper. The cabin had no phone, but Margareta had given Hazel Cal's number at the bait shop. Hazel had left a message. 3 days later, Margareta drove to the bait shop, picked up the message. She drove to the market. She walked in. Hazel did not even let her say hello. All 3, gone. I need more. As many as you can make. I'm not kidding, Margareta. All of them, in one afternoon, in 2 hours. Margareta sat down on the small wooden stool by the door. Because her hip had stopped working. Hazel laughed. Now you understand why I asked where you'd been hiding. She paid Margareta in cash. From a small green tin under the counter. $142. It was not a lot of money. It was the first money Margareta had made in her entire life, with her own 2 hands. She held the bills in her hand, and she could not speak. Hazel said quietly, It gets bigger if you let it. Margareta walked out of the market that afternoon with $142 in her coat pocket and a small piece of paper Hazel had pressed into her palm at the door. The paper said, Whatever he told you, you couldn't do. He was lying. Margareta put it in her wallet. She kept it there. She still has it. She was leaving 6 or 7 pieces at the market each week. By the middle of April, Hazel was selling every single one. The money was not much, but it was hers. Every dollar she earned was a dollar that had come from her own hands, her own eyes, her own slow, patient becoming. She bought paintbrushes with it. She bought good food. She bought a warm wool sweater in a deep forest green, the color of the pines outside her window. She bought a small hand mirror, and she hung it on the cabin wall. And for the first time in decades, when she looked at her own face, she did not flinch. She saw a woman with a scar on her arm, and strong hands, and steady eyes. She saw an artist. She saw her mother's daughter. She saw, finally, herself. The first woman came on a Tuesday in late April. Margareta was on the dock, cleaning paintbrushes in a coffee can of turpentine. Spring had finally come. The ice had broken on Mirror Pond 3 weeks ago. She heard the car before she saw it. Old engine, bad muffler, coming slowly up the dirt road. She tensed, the way you tense, when the silence has become your home and someone is about to enter it. The car was a dusty blue hatchback. From maybe 2003, it came to a stop next to the Buick, the engine side off. The door opened. A woman climbed out, about Margareta's age, maybe a little younger, thin, stooped, short gray hair, eyes red-rimmed in a way Margareta recognized, the eyes of a woman who has been crying for a long time, in private, so as not to upset her family. The woman held something in her hand, a small wooden chickadee. She walked up the path slowly, stopped at the foot of the porch, My name is Iris Calloway, the woman said. Her voice was thin. I bought this in Pine Brook Falls 3 weeks ago. The woman at the market, Hazel. She told me where to find you. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go. Margareta set down the brush. She wiped her hands on a rag. Come inside, she said. I'll make tea. Iris was 72 years old. Her husband had died the previous spring. Their daughter had decided, without consulting Iris, that she needed to move into an assisted living facility in St. Paul. The paperwork was already being drawn up. They had already toured 3 places. The daughter had picked one. Iris was supposed to be packed by the end of May. She had bought the chickadee on a whim during a last solo drive through the north. Something in the small carved bird, the tilt of its head, the patience of its making, had told her. The woman who made it might understand. She sat at Margareta's small table, with her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, and she told Margareta all of it, in a small, exhausted voice. She did not cry. She had cried it all out before. When she finished, the cabin was very quiet. Margareta did not interrupt. She did not say, I'm so sorry, honey. She did not say, have you tried talking to your daughter? She just listened. The way Hazel had listened to her in the market, the way her mother had listened to her once, a long, long time ago, before she had forgotten how. When Iris was done, Margareta sat for a moment. Then she said, you start small. Iris looked up. One thing, one morning. You take whatever you have left, even if it feels like nothing, and you make one small thing with it. Not for them, for you. I don't know how to make anything. Neither did I. In November, Iris stared at her. 72, I'm 75. Silence. What kind of small thing? Iris finally asked. Margareta stood up. She walked to the cupboard, reached into a small bin, pulled out a piece of birchwood the size of her palm. Pale, smooth, curved slightly. She walked back to the table. She set it down in front of Iris. Then she went back to the workbench, and she picked up the second smallest of her mother's carving knives, the one with the cherrywood handle. She set the knife down beside the wood. Tre. Iris stared at the wood, at the knife, at Margareta. I can't. That's what I said in November. What did you make? A bird. It was the ugliest bird in the world. Did you throw it? Margareta smiled. For the first time that afternoon, I did. Then what? I picked it up a week later, and I hung it on a peg where I could see it every morning. And it taught me everything. Iris reached out. Her hand was thin, the fingers a little bent with the same arthritis that visited Margareta in the cold. She picked up the knife. She held it. She did not move. Margareta sat down across from her. Take your time, she said. Iris stayed 3 hours. She did not finish anything that day. She made one cut, lifted the knife, made another. The wood gave way. A curl fell to the table. She watched it like she had never seen wood before. Before she left, she asked, can I come back? Yes. Next week? Yes. Bring the wood? Bring the wood. Iris drove away in the dusty hatchback. Margareta stood on the porch and watched the taillights disappear around the bend. She thought, what just happened? She did not have a word for it. Not yet. The next woman came the following Saturday. Her name was Wanda. She was 65, recently divorced, 38 years. He had told her she had let herself go. She had a worn paperback on midlife reinvention in her car and a small carved wren in her purse that she had bought at Hazel's the week after that. Odetta, 78, widow, stepchildren contesting the will of the house she had lived in for 41 years. Then Callista, 59, just pushed out of the job she had held for 24 years. The HR director had told her she should consider retirement, like it was a gift. They came the way water finds low ground, quietly, inevitably, one at a time. Margareta did not advertise. She did not invite them. She did not know how they found her. Until she did, Hazel had begun, very quietly, to slip a small piece of paper into the bag with each carving she sold. The paper said, "If this bird makes you wonder, drive north. Ask in Pinebrook Falls for the cabin at Birchlight." Hazel had not asked Margareta's permission. Hazel had not needed to. The women came, each one a little frightened, each one carrying a small wooden bird like a passport, each one with a story she had told no one or had told too many people who had not listened. Margareta poured the tea. She gave them wood. She gave them a knife. She said, "Try." She did not save anyone. She did not advise anyone. She did not tell them what to do. She told them only what her mother had told her in the letter folded in the workbench drawer. "You are not too old. You are not finished. You are only now beginning." And the women would sit, some of them for an hour, some of them for an afternoon, some of them coming back week after week, until they could carve a small chickadee and hold it up to the light and feel that same small, astonishing thing, pride, the thing the men in their lives had taught them they had no right to. By the end of April, Vivienne called. The cabin had no phone, but Margareta had finally given her daughter Cal's number at the bait shop. After the third woman had found her, Cal drove out one Tuesday afternoon, honked his horn at the foot of the dirt road, refused to come up. When Margareta limped down, he just said, "Your kid called. She says call her back." He drove away before she could ask which kid. Margareta drove to the bait shop the next morning. She dialed Vivienne's number. Vivienne picked up on the second ring. Her voice was strange, thin, wet. "Mum?" "Yes." A long silence. "Then he's gone." "Who's gone, honey?" "Marcus. He left. He left me. He left." Vivienne's voice cracked. "Oh, Mama, I didn't understand. I didn't understand." Margareta closed her eyes. She leaned her forehead against the cold glass of the payphone booth. Outside, through the dirty window, she could see Cal at the counter, pretending not to listen. She thought, here it is. Here is the moment. Here is the daughter who told me, "I'm not picking a side." She thought of all the things she could say. The cutting things, the fair things, the 44-year-old things. Then she thought of the bird on the peg. She thought of Hazel's note in her wallet. She thought of Iris Calloway picking up a knife she had never held before. And she said, "Call me." Vivienne caught her breath. "Call me." "Come to the cabin. But come, not as a victim. Come as my daughter. I cannot save you. I will not save you. I can only show you the door. Silence." Then, very small, "Okay. When?" "Whenever you can drive." Vivienne drove up 2 days later. She arrived in the late afternoon, in the wrong shoes, in the wrong coat, her face puffy with crying, her hair longer than Margareta remembered. She did not move from the car. For a long time, Margareta watched her from the porch. She did not go down to greet her. She waited. After 10 minutes, Vivienne got out. She stood beside her car with her arms crossed, looking at the cabin, looking at the lake, looking at her 75-year-old mother, with silver hair tied back in a piece of twine, and paint stains on her hands, and a scar on her forearm, and a steady, level gaze. Vivienne began to cry. "Mom, come inside, honey." Vivienne stayed 2 weeks. They cried. They fought. They were silent for whole afternoons. They sat by the stove at night, without speaking, and listened to the woods. Margareta did not push. She just lived her life. With Vivienne in it, she climbed the ladder in the morning, came down in the evening, made tea, read by candlelight, carved by the window, painted by the lake, and on the 8th night, by the stove, with a cup of tea between them. Vivienne said it. I was 8. Margareta did not look up. She did not move. I was 8. And I drew on the wall in the living room with the markers Grandma had sent me. The walls were that ivory color, the expensive ivory color, and I drew a forest, a whole forest, with birds in it and a little girl in the middle. And Daddy came home, and Vivienne's voice cracked. He screamed at me, he grabbed my arm, he tore the picture I had drawn on a paper too, crumpled it, threw it in the fire. Mom, he said, girls who scribble grow up to be girls nobody marries. Margareta stopped breathing. I was 8, and you were upstairs. You came down. You said, Hardy, please. And he just looked at you, and you stopped. The cabin was very quiet. The stove ticked. I waited for you, Mom. I waited for you to do something, and you didn't. And I learned that day that you wouldn't. And I have been so angry for 36 years. Margareta set her tea down. She walked around the table. She knelt in front of her daughter. She was 75 years old. Her hip was screaming. She did not care. She took Vivienne's hands. I am so sorry, Vivienne. Mom, I am so sorry. Mom, I should have grabbed you and the markers and walked out the door. I should have, and I didn't, because I was 29 and I was afraid. And I told myself a story that he didn't mean it. And I made you carry that story for me for 36 years. Vivienne began to zoop. Margareta gathered her daughter against her chest, on the floor of the cold cabin by the dying stove, as the wind moved through the pines outside. And for the first time in 36 years, Margareta held her daughter the way her own mother had held her, the way every mother who has ever apologized too late holds her child. Hard and true, and without any expectation of forgiveness, Vivienne went back to the city the next week. She took with her a small wooden bird she had carved with her own hands on the workbench in the loft beside her mother, in silence, for 3 afternoons in a row. It was a chickadee. The eye was a little wrong. One wing was too short. It was ugly, the way first birds are ugly. She did not throw it. She put it in her purse. She drove home by the middle of May. The cabin was unrecognizable. Margareta had spent the winter mending it from the inside, and now that the weather allowed, she worked on the outside. She rechinked the gaps between the logs with a mixture of clay from the lakeshore and dried pine needles. She patched the roof with scraps of metal she found in the old woodshed. She fixed the cracked window with a pane she carried home from the hardware store in Pine Brook Falls, wrapped in a blanket on the passenger seat of her Buick, like a baby. She painted the door a soft, clear green, the color of birch leaves in early summer, and on a Saturday morning in late May, she carved a wooden sign by hand on a piece of weathered cedar, birchlight, in letters she had burned into the wood with a heated piece of wire, the way her mother had taught her, even though her mother had not been alive to teach her anything. She hung it above the porch. She stepped back, wiped her hands on her work shirt, looked up at it, squinting against the spring sun. She thought, I made this. The whole thing, I made this. She turned, looked out at Mirror Pond. The birches along the shore were unfurling new leaves, pale, trembling, catching the late afternoon light, and glowing softly. Aspen glow. She walked down to the dock. She sat at the end with her legs dangling, the way she had not sat since she was a girl. A year ago, just 6 months ago, she had turned off the gravel road in a broken-down Buick with $580 to her name and nowhere on earth to go. Just 6 months ago, she had cried on a broken chair and wondered if this was where she had come to die. Now, she closed her eyes. She breathed in pine, water, the faint smell of paint on her hands. She breathed out. I am alive, she thought. I am alive. For the first time, in the distance, coming up the dirt road from the highway. Slow, sleek, wrong. The growl of an expensive engine. It was the first week of August. Margareta opened her eyes. She turned her head. Through the trees. She could just see it. A Blacktown car, polished to a shine that did not belong in these woods. She did not move from the dock. She sat very still. She watched it come. The town car came up the dirt road slowly, like it knew it did not belong. Margareta did not stand up. She did not even turn fully. She just sat at the end of the dock with her legs dangling and her paint-stained hands in her lap. And she watched the car parked next to her Buick, the way a stranger parks next to family. The engine shut off, the driver's door opened, and Hardy Whitlock stepped out. He was wearing a pale linen jacket, the kind men wear when they want to look casual, but have forgotten what casual is. Leather shoes already ruined from the dirt path. He had lost weight. His hair was thinner, grayer. He stood beside the car, one hand resting on the open door. He stared across the clearing, past the green-painted cabin door, past the cedar sign she had hung that May, past the garden where the first peas were curling up their wooden stakes. At her, Margareta knew what he was seeing. She could feel it, the way you feel weather coming. He was seeing a woman in a faded canvas work shirt, sleeves rolled up past her elbows, revealing the long, pale scar on her left forearm, hands stained green from thinning radishes that morning, silver hair tied back with a piece of twine, because she had misplaced her last elastic 2 days ago. He was seeing the woman she had never been allowed to become, while she was married to him, and he did not know what to do with her. Greta. His voice was careful. It carried across the clearing, the way his voice always had, trained for courtrooms, trained for tables. Greta. My God, look at you. She said nothing. She waited. He walked toward her slowly, the way a man walks toward an animal he is not sure is tame. He stopped at the edge of the dock, about 10 feet from where she sat. He looked down at her. From above, he had always preferred to look down at her. She did not stand. Greta, I'm sorry. May I come closer? She tilted her head slightly. You're already here. He flinched, but kept going. I have been looking for you for 2 weeks. Your phone was off. I went through some of your mother's old papers, found a reference to this place. I drove up on a hunch. Greta, I had no idea this cabin even. I had no idea. You didn't ask? What? You didn't ask about this cabin in 47 years. You never asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, sat down, on the dock, without invitation, 6 feet from her, his ruined shoes hanging over the edge. He did not look at her for a long moment. He looked out at the lake. Celesta is gone. He said it like a confession. She did not respond. She left me 3 weeks ago, she said. She said I was too old. A small, bitter laugh. He turned his face toward her. I have been thinking, Greta, a great deal, about us, about everything we built, about 47 years. He paused. She waited. I made a mistake. She still did not speak. I want you to come home. There? He had said it. He sat there with his expensive shoes ruined, and his thin gray hair lifting in the breeze off Mirror Pond, and his lawyer's confidence half collapsed in his chest. Waiting, Margareta did not move. She looked at him. She looked at this man she had stood beside for 47 years. She looked at the careful lift of his chin, the way he held one hand on his knee, the way his eyes flicked, to the cabin, to the green door, to the cedar sign reading Birchlight, to the freshly painted window, to her hands, and she understood. In one quiet flash, she understood. She did not say it yet. She wanted to be sure. Hardy. Yes. How did you know to come exactly? I told you. Your mother's papers. You went through her papers 2 weeks ago. After 33 years, he. Why, 2 weeks ago, he hesitated. That was when she knew. A man like Hardy Whitlock did not hesitate. Not in conversation, not unless he was about to lose something. Hardy. Yes. Tell me the truth. A long silence. The wind moved through the pines. He looked at his hands. There was a piece in the local paper, the Pine Brook Falls Gazette. Some woman runs a market. A friend of mine sent it to me. He summers near here. He said, Hardy, doesn't your wife's family have land up this way? There was a photograph of what? Of three small wooden birds on a counter. The caption mentioned the artist, a Margareta Lindquist of Birchlight Cabin. The article, said the gallery in Minneapolis, the Northland Gallery, had reached out about a possible retrospective of older work found in the cabin, paintings. He looked up. My God, Greta, I had no idea. Your mother, Astrid, there were appraisers involved. I made a couple of calls just to understand what we were. She felt herself smile. She did not mean to. It surprised her. A small, slow, astonished smile. The smile of a woman watching a play she had been a character in for 47 years from the back of the theater. For the first time, what we were, she repeated. What you were dealing with. I wanted to make sure no one was taking advantage of you. You don't know how these galleries work. I do. I can help you. Help me with the contracts, with the appraisal, with there are tax implications, Greta, of an estate like that. You don't even know what you have here. No, Hardy, I know what I have here. She stood up slowly. Her hip complained. She let it. She brushed pine dust off her jeans. He stood too, quickly, reaching out a hand, as if to steady her. She did not take it. She walked past him on the dock, up the path, toward the cabin. He followed, his ruined shoes scraping on the wood. She stopped at the porch. She turned. He stopped 6 feet away, like before, like the animal he was not sure was tame. He had been right about that one thing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, did you come because you missed me, Hardy? Or did you come because you heard? He opened his mouth. He shut it. He looked away. It's not that simple, Greta. It's exactly that simple. I do miss you. You miss the comfort. You miss having someone iron your shirts. You miss having someone smile at your jokes, which were not funny. Hardy, they were not funny. Greta, please don't say my name like I'm being unreasonable. I am not being unreasonable. I am being accurate. He took a small step back. The dock creaked. She continued. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Do you know what you gave me, Hardy? He did not answer. He did not know what to do with the question. When you put me out, you gave me back my hands. You gave me back my mornings. You gave me back my mother. You gave me back the girl I was at 19. Before I learned to make myself small enough to fit beside you, you gave me everything you spent 47 years quietly taking, and you didn't even know you were doing it. A pause? That's what makes it unforgivable. Hardy, not the betrayal, the blindness. Greta, I'm not finished. Her voice did not rise. It dropped. Yes, you are. She stepped up onto the porch, turned in the doorway, looked at him, standing there, in his ruined shoes, on her land, beneath her cedar sign, below her green-painted door, a small, gray man who had once seemed enormous. She said, you came here expecting to find me broken. You came here expecting to be generous. You came here hoping I would be grateful. Greta, And I want you to hear me very clearly. Hardy, because I will not say it twice. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I am not coming back. Not today, not next week, not ever. You are not welcome at this cabin. You will not call. You will speak to my attorney. You will not contact our children and ask them to plead your case. You will not call Vivienne. You will not call Soren. You will leave here. You will drive back to whatever life you have made without me, and you will let me have the one thing you never let me have. In 47 years, she met his eyes. My own life? Silence. A long one. Hardy looked at her. He looked at the cabin. He looked at the sign. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He had nothing to say, for perhaps the first time in his career, in any of his rooms, in any of his decades. He had nothing. He turned. He walked to the town car, his ruined shoes leaving small dark prints in the dust. He opened the driver's door. He paused. He looked back. Greta. She waited. I really am sorry. I know you are. That doesn't change anything. No. He nodded. Once. Got in the car. Closed the door. Back slowly down the dirt road, the black car swallowed by the pines. Margareta stood on the porch. She did not move until the sound of the engine faded entirely. Then she sat down on the porch step. She let out a long, slow breath. Behind her, from inside the cabin, the kettle she had put on before walking down to the dock began to whistle. She got up. She made herself tea. She drank it on the porch, watching the lake, and she did not cry. She just drank her tea. The women kept coming. Iris brought a friend, Lorelei, 68, whose son had told her she was an embarrassment at family dinners because she had started painting her nails red. Wanda came back, brought her sister, Bernadette, 70, caregiver burnout. Husband had Alzheimer's, 2 daughters who lived in California, and called once a month. Odetta brought a woman named Junie, 62, had stopped speaking for a year after her granddaughter died, came up the path holding the small carved wren she had bought at Hazel's. Without a word. Margareta gave them tea, wood, a knife, a chair on the loft floor. She did not ask their stories. They told them, or did not. She poured by the middle of August. Saturday afternoons, the loft was full, 5 women, sometimes 6, sometimes 7, carving, painting, sitting in the slanting late afternoon light, talking, or quiet, whatever each one needed that day. Odetta, it turned out, was very good at carving spoons, the cleanest, most beautiful birch spoons Margareta had ever seen. Callista was secretly a painter. She had not painted since college. She painted now small panels of lake light, of birch trunks, of her own hands, holding a brush. Junie, the silent one, carved a single wren, took her 4 weeks. The day she finished it, she looked up at Margareta and said, hoarse, cracked from not speaking, "Thank you." 2 words. Margareta did not let herself cry until Junie's car had gone. Then she sat on the porch and let it come in late July. Before Hardy had even arrived, the Northland Gallery had called. Astrid Lindquist, the unknown artist, with 50 unsigned paintings in a loft in a cabin in northern Wisconsin, was going to have a show. A woman named Davina Sorensen, the gallery's director, drove up on a Wednesday with a photographer and a small clipboard and shoes more practical than Hardy's had been. She walked into the loft. She stopped halfway across the floor. She did not speak for nearly a minute. Margareta watched her quietly from the workbench, where she was finishing a small loon for a woman in Street Cloud who had ordered 3. Davina turned. Margareta? Yes. How many paintings of my mother's? 48 finished, 2 unfinished. Oils. Yes. All from this loft. All from this loft. From when, from the late 60s through the early 90s, she died in 1992. Davina sat down on the small stool by the workbench. Like her legs had stopped working, she said, "Margareta, may I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why did no one ever know about her?" Margareta set down her carving knife. She turned. She faced this practical woman from Minneapolis with short black hair and a clipboard. And she said, "Because my father did not want a wife who was an artist. He wanted a wife who was decorative. So she became decorative in his house. And here she was herself." Davina looked around the loft, at the easel, at the workbench, at the shelves of birds, at the stacks of canvases, at the small carved face of the grandmother Margareta had never met. She nodded slowly. She said, very quietly, "Then let's let her be herself, in a building full of strangers, who will see her." Finally, Margareta nodded. She could not speak for a moment. Then she said, "Yes." The show was scheduled for September. Margareta drove down to Minneapolis 3 times that summer to meet with Davina, to go through canvases, to talk about how to hang them, what to title the show, Astrid Lindquist, The Hidden Years. She stayed in a small hotel across from the gallery, slept in a real bed with real sheets. For the first time in over a year, she missed the cabin every night. She drove home as fast as she could each time. Vivienne started coming up most weekends. She would arrive on Friday, stay through Sunday, sometimes Monday. She helped Margareta in the loft with the women, pouring tea, making sandwiches, sitting next to Junie on the floor as Junie carved her second wren. Mother and daughter did not always talk. They did not always need to. Some afternoons, they simply sat side by side at the workbench, carving small things, with wood shavings curling around their feet. Vivienne grew her hair longer, started wearing flat shoes, quit her marketing job in August, took a teaching position at a community art center, half the pay, 4 times the joy. She had not told her father. She did not plan to. In late August, Soren called. Margareta was at the bait shop, picking up a small parcel of brushes Davina had mailed her from the gallery. Cal handed her the phone with his usual indifference. "Your boy." Margareta took the receiver. "Soren." A long silence. Then, Mom. He had not called her in 14 months. Not once, since the day he had told her not to make this harder than it needed to be. His voice was different now. "Smella. Mum. I. Take your time, honey. Dad called me. I expected he would," he said. "He said you wouldn't come back," he said. "He said some things I don't think I want to repeat about you and the cabin. And Vivienne, who he found out has been coming up to see you." "Yes." "And hey what? Hey just, Mom," I sat to get me on his side, I think. "And I saw the photograph of your birds on the counter." He stopped. Margareta waited. "Mom, I didn't know you could do that." Quiet. "I didn't know. I didn't know anything about you, did I?" "Zorn, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so, I was raised to think you were. I don't know, quiet, soft, easy. I never thought of you as a person with your own anything. And I'm 47 years old, and I should have figured that out a long time ago. You are figuring it out now. Is that enough?" She looked out the dirty window of the bait shop at the dust, the pines, the gravel lot. She thought, "It will have to be." "Yes," she said. "Mom, there's a show in September of Grandma's paintings. There is, may I come?" A small click in her chest. The lock she had not known she was still carrying. Opening, "Yes, Soren, you may come." She hung up. She paid Cal for the brushes. She walked outside. She stood in the gravel lot with her face tilted up to the summer sky. And for the first time since her son was a baby in her arms, she felt that he might, someday, become a man. September arrived too fast. The day of the show. Margareta wore the forest green sweater she had bought at the market, over a plain white blouse, a long charcoal skirt, her silver hair pinned up, the scar on her arm visible at the cuff. Vivienne drove her down. Soren met them at the gallery. He was waiting outside, on the sidewalk, in a suit that did not quite fit, holding a small bouquet of white roses. He looked, Margareta thought, like a boy. He saw her, he stopped breathing. He took 2 steps forward, then 3. Then he was hugging her. He smelled like his father's cologne. He had stopped wearing his father's cologne 10 years ago. He had put it on this morning, by accident, the way grief and apology often arrive together, unplanned. He whispered into her hair, "Mom, I'm so sorry." She held him. She did not answer. Some things do not need answers. The gallery was crowded, white walls, track lighting, wine in plastic cups, people in nice clothes pretending to know about art, people in plain clothes who actually did. Hazel was there, in a navy dress, with her wire-rimmed glasses pushed up on her head. Iris was there, holding Junie's hand. Wanda and Odetta and Callista had all driven down together in Wanda's hatchback. The paintings. Margareta walked through the gallery slowly, her hand on Vivienne's arm, Soren a step behind. 50 paintings. Some she had seen in the loft, some she had only glimpsed in stacks, some she had not seen at all. A self-portrait. Astrid at 30, in a kitchen in Duluth, with flour on her hands, and eyes that looked past the painter, past the viewer, to a horizon nobody else could see. A nude, a young woman, from behind, by a lake. Margareta did not recognize her at first. Then she did. Astrid, 20 years old, before America, before marriage. A child, with 2 brown braids, bending over a piece of wood, with a small knife in her hand. The wood was a bird. The girl was Margareta, at 7 years old. Margareta stopped in front of that when her mother had painted her carving a bird at 7, a bird Margareta did not remember carving. Of course she did not remember. Her father had not let her remember. She stood there, in the white-walled gallery, in her forest green sweater, with her grown son behind her, and her grown daughter beside her, and a quiet swell of strangers moving slowly around the room. Like worshippers. She thought, "You knew, Mama. You always knew, even when I did not. You knew." Soren put a hand on her shoulder, did not say anything. That, Margareta thought, was a kind of progress too, in October. Exactly 1 year. From the day she had turned off the gravel road in a broken-down Buick with $580 to her name and nowhere to go. Margareta sat on the porch of the cabin she had hated, and then survived, and then loved. It was a Saturday morning, the 1st of October. The birches were on fire along the shore, aspen glow. Her mother had named this place for the light, for the brief moments. When something ordinary caught fire, she had a cup of tea in her hands, a notebook on her lap, and the cabin behind her was warm. The stove had been replaced in August with a new one that didn't leak. The roof had been retarred. The window in the loft had been doubled. She had hot running water now from a small heater run off a propane tank. She still pumped water from the well sometimes, out of habit, out of love. She had a community of women who found her without being called. She had a daughter who came up most weekends, a son who called twice a month, a friend named Hazel who drove out for Sunday dinners. She had a small fellowship at the Northland Gallery, a monthly stipend for continuing to share her mother's work with the world. She had her own money, she had her own name, she had her own life, and she had something else. She had not gone looking for it, but it had arrived, the way the women had arrived, quietly, inevitably. In the loft, in late September, she had been pulling out the bottom drawer of the workbench to replace a piece of leather backing. That had finally rotted through. The drawer would not come out. She had wiggled it, pulled it, sworn at it, the way every artist learns to swear at their tools. Then she had reached underneath and felt a small, flat, wooden compartment. Mounted under the drawer, hidden, her hand froze. She had pulled the workbench away from the wall, knelt down, found a thin sliding panel, slid it open. Inside, a small bank book, the cover faded, the corners soft, the name on the front, A. Northwood. Margareta did not know that name. She opened it, page after page, of small, careful deposits made over decades from a single anonymous gallery in Duluth. Buyers from across the country. Small canvases, small carvings, sold quietly. Ona S. pseudonym, a name no one had ever connected to Astrid Lindquist, a name no one had ever needed to. A balance $84,317. Saved over 30 years by a woman whose husband believed she had no money of her own. Tucked behind the bank book, a small folded note in her mother's careful Scandinavian hand. Min flicka, if you find this, then you have lasted long enough to need it. I did not trust your father. I did not trust the husband you would choose. I did not trust the world. I trusted only you. Some of this is from my work. Some is from my mother's small savings. Some is from selling a single ring my own grandmother left me, which I had been hiding for 40 years. It is yours. Do not give it to anyone. Do not let any man advise you on it. Do not consult Hardy or your son or any nice young man with a financial degree. It is your freedom. Spend it however you wish. Save it, burn it, use it to leave, use it to stay, use it to build something I never could. Do not let them tell you what to do with it. Do not let them ever again tell you what to do with anything. Mama. Margareta had sat on the cabin floor. She had not cried. She had simply held the bank book to her chest for a long, long time. She had not told Soren. She had not told Vivienne. She had not told Hazel. She had not told anyone. Not yet. She had taken the bank book to a small bank in Duluth, the same one her mother had used. The teller, a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes, had looked at the bank book, then up at Margareta, then down, then up again. She had said, very quietly, "Welcome back, Miss Northwood." Margareta had let out a laugh that was half a sob. She had transferred the funds into a new account in her own name, Margareta Lindquist. Not Whitlock, Lindquist. She had her mother's name back. She had her own money. She had her own life, and she was, for the first time, free. Now, October the 1st, a year to the day, Margareta sat on her porch, tea in her hands, notebook on her lap. She picked up the pen. She wrote, "It has been 1 year. I live alone in my mother's cabin at the edge of Mirror Pond. I have strong hands. I have a scar on my left arm that runs from the inside of my elbow halfway to my wrist. I have a loft full of carvings and paintings. I have a daughter who knows me, and a son who is learning. I have a community of women who found me without being called. I have for the first time in my life, a self that I recognize. When I look in a mirror, I was not too old. Mama was right. I was only. Now, beginning, if someone is reading this someday, a granddaughter, a great niece, a stranger, a woman who comes to Birchlight because someone told her where to find me. I want you to know this. You were never worthless. You were only hidden. You were a cabin in the woods that no one wanted because they could not see what was inside. You were a woman with an artist's hands who was told to fold napkins. You were loved, always, by the women who came before you, even the ones you never knew, were watching. Open the hatch. Climb the ladder. You are not finished. You are only now beginning. She set the pen down. She closed the notebook. She looked out at the lake. The birches were on fire. A breeze moved through them. Their pale leaves trembled, and the light caught them. And for a moment, the whole shoreline shimmered like a bowl of pale gold flame. Aspen glow. Behind her, a car door opened. She turned her head. Vivienne, driving up for the weekend, was climbing out of her car, waving beside her, climbing slowly out of the passenger side. A small woman Margareta did not recognize. Olda, maybe 70, holding a small object wrapped in a paper bag. Margareta could not quite see what, but she always knew now, it would be a bird. A small, wooden bird that had told this woman, the woman who made me, will understand. Margareta stood up. She set her tea on the porch railing. She walked down the steps, across the dirt, toward the car, toward her daughter, toward the stranger with the small bird in her hand. She raised her arm in greeting, the scar pale in the morning sun. She called out, "Come inside, honey. I'll make tea." Behind her, the cabin, the cedar sign, the green door, the loft above, with its hatch open and its ladder waiting, and the pale glowing birches around it all, holding the small bright thing her mother had built for him a long, long time before she ever knew she would need it